A dark fantastic network presentation. Last scene. A mystery.
She was afraid. Maybe he wouldn't show up tonight. It was a perfect night to be out in the city. Michelle was young, attractive, in the company of people she liked, walking down a street in one of the best parts of town. For a 29-year-old with a high school diploma, she was doing just fine. It would take time, but she was going to prove to Lara, to everybody, that she could make it in the city. She noticed how people were looking at her friends. They were all being a bit too loud, a bit too showy. But they just left a great party at a great place, and most of them were a little drunk. Not Michelle, though. She rarely touched the stuff. I'd kill to know what you're thinking. It was Rachel, a new friend she'd made a couple of months ago. Rachel was good-natured, easy to talk to, and knew all the latest fashions. Michelle needed someone like that at the moment. She needed to get her cultural bearings. Needed to arm herself so she could survive in such an aggressive, ever-changing place. She didn't exactly know why Rachel needed her, but she didn't want to overthink it. She was grateful for the friendship and the opportunities it provided her. Nothing. I just phased out, I guess, Michelle said, lying. Too much booze, Rachel said, smiling. Yeah, I guess, Michelle said, lying again. Michelle knew she ought to be focused on the here and now, on having a good time, making connections. But all she could think of was him. Rachel slowed down a bit and Michelle followed suit. They were now a few paces behind the rest of the group. Check out that guy. Rachel was pointing at Paul, someone they'd met at the party. A tall, well-built guy in their age range. Likeable enough, Michelle thought, but she hadn't really had a chance to talk to him. I see him, Michelle said, trying to hide her lack of interest. You want him? Rachel said, then winked at her. I barely know him. Yes or no? Rachel said, still smiling. I'll pass, Michelle said. Good. I've had my eye on him all night. He's sexy and he has friends in the right places. I even heard him talking about the new Luna movie. Luna? Michelle asked. The small studio churning out medium-budget stuff. It's the perfect fit for me. Him or the studio? Michelle asked. Rachel looked her straight in the eye, still smiling. He can get me through the door. Once I'm in, I'll make my own way. Show up for every goddamn audition. Good luck. You can do it, Michelle said. Yes, I can. Now, if you'll excuse me. Rachel touched up her lipstick, pulled up her dress a little bit, the better to show off her beautiful legs, and started towards the group, leaving Rachel behind without a second glance. It takes what it takes, Michelle whispered, stifling a laugh. Footsteps. Behind her. Michelle turned and saw him. He was following her again. He just stood there, at the corner, dressed all in black, the lights from a nearby bookstore barely touching him, casting him half in shadow. She took a step forward, wanting to get a better look at him. The lights inside the bookstore suddenly went out. Closing time. He just stood there, his back to her. But she knew it was him. She knew he was here for her. She heard laughter. It was Rachel. Michelle turned around, saw that her friends were far away now. No one had noticed yet that she was missing from the group. She turned around. He was still there. She took another step closer. He started to turn his head, look over his shoulder. Michelle, Rachel said, looking back at her. Michelle didn't turn around. All she wanted now was to come closer, see the face of the man who had been following her for days. Always from afar, never revealing his face. At first, when she'd first noticed him, she was scared half out of her mind. She'd told Rachel, and Rachel had told her to call the police. But Michelle didn't want the headache, and a few days later, she'd cooled off and thought she was being paranoid. Then he showed up again. Always standing there, always at night, always just out of reach. Then he'd disappear for days. And she'd think that she'd imagined it all. Then she started feeling his presence. Sensing it when he was close. A strange sensation, a mixture of fear and anticipation. A sort of need. Not unpleasant, but in a way overwhelming. But now she was certain. She wasn't imagining it. He was there. And this was real. A gust of cold wind. He put his hands in his coat pockets, started walking away from her. And she made up her mind. Tonight, she would face him. Tonight, she would know. And so she followed, away from the crowded streets, and into darkness. William last took a deep breath, combed his dark blonde hair with his hands one last time, then took the plunge. He passed the threshold and entered the ballroom. It was like passing from one world into another, from the quiet of the empty corridor into the hustle and bustle of the party. It was a grand room, the kind of place he enjoyed. Classic design, high ceiling, tasteful lighting. The smooth jazz in the background blending with the sound of 50 people laughing, eating, drinking. He smiled, enjoying the atmosphere, the elegant surroundings, the smell of whiskey and perfume. Well, you look rather good, my friend," someone said, and William knew from the sound of that slightly slurred English accent that it could only be Johnny. And Johnny it was who suddenly materialized by William's side. As usual, Johnny looked like he'd dressed in a hurry. "Thanks. You don't look too bad yourself," William said. "For a couple of blokes hurtling towards middle age, I guess we don't look too shabby." "Middle age? Speak for yourself. You're older than me." "Whatever. How have you been?" Johnny said. "You mean since we last saw each other, which was last night?" "Yeah. Pretty much the same." "Good. Just thought I'd ask." Johnny suddenly noticed he was holding a drink in each hand. He handed one to William. "Ginger ale. No ice." "Don't mind if I do." "Thanks," William said, taking the drink. Johnny raised his glass in a silent toast and took a sip. "You really should make an exception tonight, you know." "No," William said. "This is an informal high school reunion, which means it's a gathering of some friends, mostly enemies, most of which you haven't seen in 20 years. You'll need something to help you get through it." "I'm enjoying myself so far," William said, then took a sip of ginger ale. "It was good." "Of course you are. You haven't run into Georgie yet." "You mean George Cooper?" "The one and only." "And why would he be interested in talking to me? We didn't exactly hang out in high school." "He'll want to show off. He's the one sponsoring this shindig." "Really? Must have cost him a pretty penny." "He can afford it. Rumor has it he owns this place." "He owns the Connors Hotel? Wow. What does he do for a living?" "A little bit of this, a little bit of that. I hear he's going into broadcasting next. So beware." William nodded, looked around. A lot of familiar faces and a few strangers. He was struggling to put names to faces. Time had been kind to some and harsh on others. There was Tommy Burton, still boyish, still chubby. And Anna Marie, still loud, still laughing at anything and everything. He kept looking, but he still couldn't find her. "I know what you're thinking," Johnny said. "Really?" "You're thinking, where is she?" William ignored him, kept on searching the crowd. "I guess you haven't heard." "Heard what?" William said. "About her, I mean." William stopped looking, turned to Johnny, who suddenly looked uncomfortable. "What is it?" William asked, starting to get nervous. "It's Michelle. She is missing."
This has been Last Scene, a Mystery.